As I trudged through Afghanistan's lush Maizan River Valley on what would be my final combat patrol, I stopped for a moment to catch my breath before climbing an earthen embankment. I had to keep my guys out of the riverbed where we were easy targets and off the roads where the locals like to bury bombs. They didn't usually like placing IEDs in and around their homes, so fuck the roads. We're taking the safest route, through their fields and farms, because none of us wanted to be the last casualty in a forgotten war, and no one was trying to be a hero, especially on our last mission. I took a breath and looked at the fields ahead. An acre of red poppies danced playfully in the breeze, and the craggy mountains cast a looming shadow over some mud-walled homes ahead. I marveled as the Afghan cliffs slowly swallowed the most beautiful sunset I had ever seen. It'd be kind of pretty if it weren't for all those shitty houses. The lush valley was a light show of colors. It was littered with crude, mud-walled homes, dirt roads, and the scars of centuries of war. I was captivated and sick of it. I missed my home, my wife, my pug Roxy, and I missed having a beer after work. My gut wrenched over a decision that I knew I had to make, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. Hang up my boots, say goodbye to life in the infantry. But after a 7-year love-hate relationship with the Army, most of which was spent overseas, I realized that I love seeing the world, the camaraderie, the experience of serving, but I'd long since grown weary of the caveat. I was at the end of my enlistment, and I had to choose, re-up or get out. I wanted to stay in, but I was tired. I was tired of saying goodbye to my wife, tired of keeping my family at a distance, and I was tired of keeping a guilty tab on my growing list of dead friends. I longed for a normal life, and even though I didn't have any idea what the fuck that even meant anymore, I just knew that it had to be better than all this. But I loved what I did. Training soldiers, leading them through combat. It was the most rewarding experience of my life. I loved the guys with whom I served like family, and being a grunt was all I'd known since I was 19. I wondered if I should just accept the fact that this is my life. I watched my soldiers following in formation. It had taken countless hours of training and a year at war to turn what was once a gaggle fuck of misfits and teenagers into an effective fighting force. I smiled proudly and kept walking. As I stepped, I twisted my ankle and slipped. Gravity jerked my body one way and sent the 90 pounds of gear I was wearing violently in the opposite direction. I sailed to the ground like a bag of bricks. "You all right?" My platoon sergeant half giggled through my radio. "This'll buff out," I answered, still spitting out pieces of Afghanistan as I spoke. "Miss this?" Let me count the ways. I dusted myself off and kept moving. I reached the edge of the Scarlet Morphine Farm and climbed a wall to the next one. It was filled with poppies planted in neat rows, and as I climbed, my mind wandered back to scaling walls while fighting house to house in southern Baghdad a few years back. It wasn't anything like this. Back then, we'd quickly climb crude walls, rush into half-ruined homes, and race to the rooftop, where entire neighborhoods would erupt into gunfire and my heart would race as I clutched my rifle's grip, my eyes and my sights racing frantically through the haze of incoming lead, and the confusion of trying to tell who was trying to kill us and who was just trying not to get shot. I thought of the adrenal rush as bullets sang just overhead, that carnivorous dread that gnawed at our sanity, and how we fought through it, arrogantly. I thought of the dozen guys that didn't make it home, and the couple dozen more who were broken, blown up, shot. I remembered how the rest of us were left to pick up the pieces of our lives, carry on and fight in their absence. I remembered going home. The dead, they're the lucky ones. I was still coming to terms with my first homecoming from war on the eve of leaving Afghanistan. I relived old firefights by night and avoided them by day. I was so neurotic about my guys' safety because I was tired of seeing young Americans die on forgotten battlefields, in wars that no one back home gave a shit about anymore. Fuck this, I thought. I led my squad through the second poppy field and onto a small dirt road that was within eyesight of our mountain home. After a year spent battling the crags and my convictions, I walked the last few painful muddy steps with my chin up, because I knew that at least this time, it was all different. I knew I was still dealing with some old demons, but at least I'd managed to keep my shit together. I trained and led 10 soldiers through 12 months of combat, and this time, I was bringing all of them home alive, and most of them were still in one piece. I did my job. I was proud. I looked at the faces of my soldiers, and I counted them as they walked through the concertina wire before keying my radio for the last time. Hey, 2-6, this is 2-3. We're 100%. Roger that, 2-3. Welcome home. I stepped into our sandbagged outpost and smiled proudly. The next day, I again counted my guys as they boarded a CH-47 helicopter. It was our ride out of the bomb-laden mountains and back to Camp Disneyland, otherwise known as Kandahar Airfield, or CAF. CAF was our next stop on our way back to Germany, where we were stationed. Going home, it never felt real until that CH-47 threw massive plumes of dirt as we lifted off the mountainside and flew south. Good riddance. I remembered my first awkward homecoming, and I wondered how many years it would take to adjust this time. I closed my eyes and listened to the helicopter clamor through the desert dawn. I thought of red poppies. Later that night, a few of us went out to explore our interim home. Compared to our forsaken outpost, CAF was a 5-star resort, and we fully intended to enjoy ourselves. We bought cigars and pizza. We reminisced about humping our gear over mountains, getting rained on, and eating expired MREs, all while the Pogues stationed on CAF had such plush standards of living. The Leviathan Air Base had USO shows and contractor-run dining facilities. Hell, there was even a weekly salsa night on the boardwalk. An actual boardwalk filled with shops and restaurants. Afghanistan. Individual experiences may vary. I joked as I chewed pepperoni pizza. Our 12 months in Afghanistan had truly sucked, but it paled in comparison to the combat I'd seen in Iraq a few years back. I remembered the burned homes, dead kids, and friends lose limbs. I felt stupid for complaining. I'm just happy we got everybody here, I said. Well, those soldiers of yours, my platoon sergeant looked to me and said, Brand, Espy, Spaulding. Yeah, they sure did make it easy, I nodded. Over the last year, I had to hold their hands through everything from weapons training to personal hygiene problems. I chewed in silence for several minutes. A greasy pizza and a Coke was in heaven. And that's when my platoon sergeant's phone rang. It was one of the soldiers in our platoon. I could hear the panicked voice. It's Spaulding, the voice said. Spaulding's been shot. I went, what? Shot? It didn't make any sense. We were miles away from any real combat, and we were on the eve of our homecoming. We scrambled to our feet and out the door, clutching our rifles as we ran. My heart raced. Two of us stepped into the road and tried to flag down a passing bus. It didn't stop, so we raised our rifles. Then it stopped, and the three of us climbed aboard. All I managed to hear, my platoon sergeant took a deep breath, was that Spaulding's been shot, he sighed, and that Baker did it. Baker? Baker was another soldier in our platoon and a close friend of Spaulding. And although they were both problem soldiers, none of this added up. This didn't make any fucking sense, I said. He said something about they were playing, my platoon sergeant's face cringed, and that Baker shot him in the head. The bus dropped us off at the Combat Support Hospital as the Humvee arrived, exactly as the Humvee arrived, that was carrying our wounded soldier, Riley Spaulding. His face was covered in blood-drenched gauze, and I could see that he'd suffered a point-blank gunshot wound to the forehead. My mind raced with questions. The reasons why were still fuzzy. The trauma was all that was clear. I watched 4 corpsmen carry Riley Spaulding onto a hospital bed and quickly wheel him inside. We followed closely. As they pushed the gurney through a doorway, Spaulding's bandage fell from his face. He's not going to make it, I thought. We watched the frantic doctors do their damnedest, but it was no use. It was too late. I looked at the bullet hole in Riley's forehead. It was too much. God damn it. I stuck around to fill out the paperwork. What the hell, Spaulding? I looked at his vacant eyes. You were trained better than this. I choked back the tears as I signed my name, officiating his death. He was a lovable goof, kind of like a little brother. Now he was dead. A week later, the rest of us were back in Germany. We landed at Ramstein Air Base near Frankfurt, and then loaded buses on our way back to Vilseck, where our lives that were interrupted a year prior had left off. I stared out the bus window, the thick green pines, and rain-soaked Autobahn. I didn't know what to think about the carefree civilians driving beside us. They were completely oblivious. It was odd to not worry about IEDs in the road, and it was weird to be so close to home. Because suddenly, it was such a vague concept. I thought of what it was like going home last time and shuddered. I wondered what it would be like now. This time, everything was different. I thought about Riley Spaulding. We were less than an hour away.